Okay, this talk is called, as you can see, Get Off MAMP and XAMPP, Virtualising with Vagrant. Before we actually get into things, just a little about me. My name is David Frame. I started using PHP about 15 years or so. Primarily interested in object-oriented programming, design patterns, frameworks, R&D type stuff, you know. I was a research developer at Tybus, simply Zesty, for about 10 years there. It was my first real job. I was senior developer at Bluecube, AV Brown, in 2013. I'm currently a senior developer at 31 Interactive. And that should say 2013 to present, not 2003 to present, as I just realized. Okay, bit of an introduction then to this here. Web-specific solution stacks. So, whenever you create a website, you host it somewhere, whether it's your own local system or on a remote server, you're generally hosting on one of these stacks, either LAMP, XAMPP in Windows, WAMP in Windows, MAMP, Mac. LAMP is commonly used in servers, rest are commonly used for development on the desktop. Some people will host sites using XAMPP or WAMP on Windows in hosting environments. It's very, very uncommon though. They're generally used for development. The point of this talk is to explain why XAMPP and WAMP really, XAMPP, WAMP and MAMP can be replaced by a slightly better system, and you'll see some of the benefits as we go through this. So what's the current problem? What's the point of this talk? What I'm actually trying to convey here? Well, there's fundamental differences and incompatibilities between the desktop stacks and the production stacks. Okay, it makes sense. The version of PHP that would be running on Windows is going to it's a different binary from what's running in Linux. Things like Apache versions and other software that's running behind. If you consider things like permissions and command line utilities that might be running, so on. These incompatibilities aren't great because if you're developing locally on Windows, on your Mac, in one of these stacks, you can't make use of whatever it's going to be on your production environment. You can't be 100% sure that whatever you're doing on your local environment is going to work on the production environment. There's just many risks. Desktop stacks are fiddly and time-consuming to set up and configure. If you've ever used one of them, you'll know that there's quite a lot of software to, normally you can get one of these as like a bundle that you would download, but there's a lot of configuration. Setting up virtual hosts and locally, using your hosts file, any other sort of bits and pieces you might need to change in your PHP config, your Apache config. There's just lots and lots of things to concern yourself with. So it can be very fiddly to use these, even though they might appear to be quite simple to start with. Whenever you're actually downloading these bundles, it never really works out that way. They offer limited possibilities for customization. Again, this sort of goes along with this whole idea of downloading a bundle containing this software. You can't really customize that well. You're sort of restricted to the options that are available within that bundle. Say you wanted to upgrade your version of PHP that you've got with WAMP or XAMPP. Say you wanted to upgrade your version of Apache. You can downgrade, things like that, to try and match your production environment. It just becomes a bit of a mess, really fiddly and annoying. They can't be configured on a site-by-site basis. This is quite important. If you have a website that is being hosted on, say, a virtual server in the cloud, you are working on it locally, but you may have other websites sitting in your local environment. So your local environment is set up to host several websites, but you're working on a website that's going to be hosted on one server. One site, one server, but you're working on multiple sites on your desktop system. The setup behind that, again, it's just a big incompatibility between your workstation and what's on the server. There's more. Desktop stacks place restrictions on the tools that can be used server-side. Think of something like, say you need to convert a video. So some user uploads a video to your site for whatever reason. You need to downscale it or convert it to different formats, convert it to an FLV for streaming or something along those lines. There's a command line utility called Ffmpeg, I think. It's easy enough to install on like a Linux environment. Just install it, use it as command line utility. More difficult to use in Windows or potentially the Mac. That's just one example. You could be using any sort of utility that is available in one environment but not the other, and it binds your hands in some cases. It means you can't really do what you would want to be doing just because, again, those differences in environments. It's not a good thing. This is a big one as well. They're often inconsistent between team members. You can get people to you can get your team members to download these bundles, XAMPP, MAMP, whatever, but how do you get them to configure them exactly the same way? Again, very tricky, very, very tricky. And if your sites are built with the understanding, with assumptions that certain software is going to be available, or certain settings are going to be available, or set, or whatever, how do you ensure that all the team members have those settings? Do you send emails around? What do you do? It's just a mess. So they aren't portable. Sort of going along with that previous point. What can you do with them? You know, they're tied down to your workstation. Say you have a big crash. Okay. Say your system crashes out, hard disk's wiped, you're stuck. Okay. Your project code might be in a Git repository, remote repository. It's safe. It's good. You can get it back. Maybe you've lost a few wee things. No problem. Bring it back. Your whole working environment is gone. Your XAMPP setup, your WAMP setup, whatever, all of those settings I mentioned in the previous slide that you've had to configure, wiped out. How the hell are you going to remember those? Okay, they're gone, and you're going to spend an age getting back up to speed. Yeah. So those are the main problems. If you've used one of these stacks before, you've probably run into several of these issues. I know I have when I've used them before. And it has been a bit of an annoyance in the past. Thankfully, though, there's a solution to it. Wouldn't it be much easier if we could just develop directly on a LAMP stack? That's where we're hosting the site, right? That's the cause of this problem. The site's on a LAMP stack, but it's being developed on a WAMP stack, Windows stack, Mac stack. So it would be so much easier if we just developed on the LAMP stack. Well, we can. So just do your development on production environment instead. Don't do that. Don't do that. Better solution is to virtualize. Okay, I'm sure everybody's heard of virtualization. Virtualization software such as VMware Workstation, Oracle, VirtualBox allow us to replicate production environments right on our desktops. Okay. So tailor-made virtual machine solves almost all of the aforementioned problems. Okay, we're able to replicate our production environment right there on our desktop. This will be run a small system in the background of our desktops that replicates almost identically the production environment. We can put our site on that. We can host it through that. And we've got a lot less incongruent, okay, between the two environments. So that's the ideal solution, okay, to put it on a virtual machine. So this is just a basic screenshot, an example. So here we have VMware Workstation. It's running in a Windows box, obviously. I've got WordPress in the background there. I don't know, I just grabbed this from Google Images. And an Ubuntu box running in the VM. Okay, so Ubuntu within Windows. The nice thing about this sort of stuff is that virtualization software is really far along now. Considerable amounts of network support. You could, for example, put a website on a VMware box or a VMware or VirtualBox box, and host it to the live internet. Running on your desktop system, you can just set up the network settings in such a way that you can do that. So very, very flexible. Okay. So this is really our solution to the problem, but it's not all good. Okay, there's still issues to this. It's still not very portable. So think of it this way. You set up your VM, you've installed all the software you need to into it, okay? It's all set up perfectly. You spent several hours getting everything correct, everything together. But how then are you going to share that VM with a team member, okay? Now this software, virtualization software, tends to offer solutions to this. You can export VMs as appliances. But they end up as being files that are 300, 400 megs in size. How do you pass those around team members in your office? What about versioning? Say you make a change to a VM somewhere down the line. You need to get that out to your team members. You send out an email. How do you make sure that everybody is running the same version of the VM? That can be a problem. You could host them on a server or something like that there, but it just becomes messy. One VM for multiple projects with multiple VMs, even less portable. So how do you know how to set things up? Do you have one VM that hosts all of your sites in the same way that XAMPP or WAMP would do, or MAMP? Or do you have multiple VMs? Okay, one site, one VM, like it would be in your production environment. The problem with one site for one VM, you end up with more VMs. Going back to the first point, how do you get them around the office? You end up with tons and tons of huge files sitting there on a server or being emailed around or sitting on Dropbox or whatever. If you're working remotely as well, do you want to download like a 600 meg file when a team member emails you with a list of changes? Not quite. Inconsistency is still a problem. Which version of the VM is your colleague using? I sort of mentioned that if somebody makes a change to the VM, how do you know you're working on the latest version? You bring your site in, you download it from your VCS, you get working away, you bring it up in your browser, and something's broken, and you can't figure out what the hell is broken. You're looking at the code, and you're scratching your head. What's wrong? And then you realize 3 hours later that a colleague who was also working on it added something to their VM, a new utility, changed permissions, did something with it, didn't let you know, and there's nothing wrong with the code at all. It was your environment. Without extra documentation, it's difficult to know what software is installed or available on a VM. Again, if you've ever used Linux, it's really quite tricky to get a good, solid idea of what is actually installed in a VM. So, say you need to rebuild it at some point. How do you know what to install on it? Problem. So, enter Vagrant. Okay. In a nutshell, Vagrant is a wrapper to virtualization software, typically VirtualBox. Some people use it with VMware, some people use it with other providers, that allows an entire VM environment to be set up from a single, straightforward initialization script. Okay? So the whole process of setting up a VM, installing software into it, getting your network set up, all that other stuff that can be fiddly, difficult to work with, is distilled down into one script. Okay. The handy thing about that is that one script can be stuck in along with your project and your project repository. You bring down the repository when you want to start working on it. You've got your initialization script just there. Use Vagrant, start it up. You've got your VM. Perfectly provisioned, perfectly versioned. Everything's there that needs to be there. So it's incredibly portable. Commit a Vagrant initialization script and Vagrant file to your project repository. And notice a Vagrant file, that is the name of the initialization script, so you'll see me refer to that later on. Commit that to your repository, you can immediately spawn a VM that's customized to that project. No more large VM images to deal with. Vagrant file is typically only 3 kilobytes in size, it's just a small text file initialization. Very little software requirements. You only need to have Vagrant and the virtualization software, such as VirtualBox, installed on your desktop system. Okay. Can you consider something again like WAMP or XAMPP? Yes, you're only downloading one bundle, but you're installing several software packages. Okay. Apache, PHP, MySQL, any other utilities that might be there. You might even need to install some other utilities in the background that your project relies on. This year it's two packages. And it's widely used as well. I think the BBC uses Vagrant for some projects, and O'Reilly, and I'm trying to remember who's listed on the Vagrant website, but there's some big names on there. Widely used, lots and lots of plugins to make things really, really easy. Lots of tools that you can work with, some of them will be listed later on. Lots of support, lots of questions and answers on the like of Stack Overflow, lots of guides on the web on how to use it. So don't be concerned if you want to use Vagrant, don't be concerned about it being some niche thing that's like a niche technology. Lots and lots of people use this. And if you're a fan of Ruby, a Vagrant file is simply a Ruby script. If you want, you can add your own dynamic functionality to it. Again, you'll need some Ruby skills to actually do that. The script itself is simple. It's really, you'll see examples of the scripts in just a short moment, but you can make them as complicated as you want. Okay, you can use Ruby to its full extent, add whatever. And I've done a couple of things myself, just from doing that, just from adding some Ruby code into a Vagrant file. And I think it's something to do with displaying IP addresses or something along those lines. But all that sort of stuff is possible. So yeah, very, very flexible. So here's a Vagrant file. I'm not going to go too far into this because I'm going to break it down over the next few slides. But this is sort of the length of a Vagrant file, or this is in truth actually quite a long Vagrant file. There's quite a few options being listed here. But you can see it's quite easy to read. You know, it's really just key value pairs throughout. That stuff about has plugin, you don't really need to worry about that. It's fairly simple, and we'll break this down. Okay. Box files. Okay. Whenever you create a Vagrant file, the bare minimum thing you have to have listed in it is a box file. And what is a box file? It's essentially a ready-made virtual hard disk file. Okay. Whenever you create a VM in VMware or VirtualBox or whatever else, that will create a VHD file. Okay, it's just a file, single file that is like a file system. Okay, it contains the operating system you've installed onto the box, any files you save to it, anything else. So a VHD file is just an image of a hard disk that would be used by a virtual machine. And these Vagrant box files are just VHDs with pre-installed operating systems and a couple of other small things that you don't really have to worry about. It takes all that away. And there's lots of them. Okay? There's two main sources for these VMs. These box files. We've got the Vagrant Cloud website. That's the official source. That only came out maybe, I don't know, about 8 or 10 months ago or something. Vagrant Cloud appeared. So it's an official source of these box files, and indeed this is the Vagrant Cloud list of boxes on Vagrant Cloud. So you can see there's Precise 64, there's going to be Top 94, CentOS, Debian, Fedora, FreeBSD. There's tons and tons and tons of them. Okay, that's just this tiny selection. So you pick one of those, decide this is the one I want to use for my Vagrant file. I use that, and you'll see how it can be used shortly. Another source is vagrantbox.es. Okay, it's a third-party host of Vagrant boxes, box files. But it's very popular. Again, it was the main source for box files before Vagrant Cloud came along, and there's lots on there. And one of the nice things as well is you can create your own box file. There's a command in Vagrant called Vagrant package that will take your VM as you have it set up and turn it into a box file, so you can use it in other projects if you want. Customize it in other projects. And there's utilities such as Packer as well that will do something similar. Network settings. Okay, so this is quite an important thing. You know, if you're hosting a website on a VM, you need to have some control over the network settings of that VM. Thankfully, there's lots of different options available. You can use port forwarding, or it uses port forwarding by default. Okay, so requests to port 8080 on your desktop PC will be forwarded to port 80 on the VM. This is set up in the Vagrant file. I'm going to do is jump back both sides. I'm not using it there. Apologies. You'll see it later. It's used in one of the examples. Okay, so you can forward any number of ports you would normally use. These are sort of standard settings that are available in like VirtualBox anyway. Okay, you can set these without going through Vagrant. Vagrant just provides a nice scriptable interface to it. You can also use DHCP if you want. That'll just request a separate IP address when the box starts up, and just grab its own IP from your router, whatever your network setup is. You can hard code an IP address if you really want to. You can specify multiple VMs in a single Vagrant file, all hosted in their own little network, so they can all talk to each other. The main advantage of doing that is that, again, you can match your production environment, right? Your production environment, you might have a web server, you might have a database server, you might have a queue server, you could have a caching server, you could have, who knows what sort of cluster you would have there. You can now match that using Vagrant. Okay, you can set up Vagrant to spawn all these VMs for your various nodes and replicate that production environment. Very, very useful. Sure as hell can do that on XAMPP MAMP. Provisioning options. This is probably the key thing, the most important thing of all with Vagrant. It's all well and good selecting one of these box files, starting it up, spawning a VM, but what are you going to do with it? It needs to be configured. You need to install software packages on it. You choose one of those box files you saw on the previous slide, a couple of slides ago. There's going to be nothing on it. There's going to be no Apache there. There's going to be no PHP. So how do you do it? How do you actually get that software on there? Provisioning. Vagrant supports a number of different provisioning methods. Okay, simplest, the shell. It's just a list of Linux commands. If your VM is a Linux box, you use shell. Just spam out Linux commands, apt-get installed, blah, 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 all the way down. They get installed in your VM as soon as it starts up. Okay. Chef, Puppet. Those are just two automation packages. Do much the same thing as shell, but in a more a more structured format. So you can create recipes of provisioning items that you may want to include in your VM. It's a wee bit outside of the scope of this here to go into these, but they are available. Docker is something not similar, but sort of similar. I won't go into it. Ansible, Salt, and more. So there's lots of different options for provisioning. Okay, that's the key. And Vagrant has a really simple CLI syntax, as you can see from both sides of the slide. There's not really much to talk about there. It's fairly straightforward. Start VM, you type Vagrant up. Suspend it, Vagrant suspend, halt, reload, SSH. So you spawn a VM, you want to SSH into it, so you have a look around, do whatever. Vagrant SSH, you're in. You don't even have to worry. Now if you're using Windows, it's a wee bit more complicated than that. I don't think you can, unless you have the right software installed or some sort of like a PuTTY bridge or something like that there, I don't think you can use Vagrant SSH in Windows. But if you're using, if your host machine is Mac or Linux, just type Vagrant SSH. If you're using Windows, tend to just use something like PuTTY. And you can just connect to localhost port 2222 by default, not you into the VM. Vagrant destroyed, destroys the VM, etc. So, not many options available. You can see this is just a Vagrant help here. That's all there is to it. They're all fairly self-explanatory options. Okay. Time for some examples. Excuse me while I sit down. Can everybody see that okay? I might actually, hang on. There we go. Okay, so I've got 3 examples of Vagrant files here. And I'll show you what I have. So, first of all, I'll just list what's in this folder. Consider this example 1 as like a project folder. Okay. Ignore that .vagrant, that was just from a previous setup when I ran it. But there's your Vagrant file, and that's the key thing behind all of this. So let's have a look at it. So this is really the basics of a Vagrant file. This is all you need to get started. One line, config.vm.box, Ubuntu Trusty64. Now what happens in this case, it will realize that, oh, okay, I don't know what Ubuntu Trusty64 is. It'll go back to, remember this Vagrant Cloud website that hosts some of these VMs, the official source. It'll look for a box on there called Ubuntu/Trusty64. It'll then download it from the website and store it locally, okay? And if you then start up another VM at a later date, or the same VM, it'll look to see, does this Trusty64 box exist on my system? Has it been previously downloaded? It has, great, use it. Okay, so it will only download once. Now, I'm going to spawn the VM that this indicates. So I would type Vagrant up. Now, this is already downloaded to this system, this box file. So very little needs to happen here. Let's see a little bit of output just as it goes through. See this line waiting for the machine to boot. So in the background, this is creating a VM. It's done. It's a VM run. So let's go for Vagrant SSH. And now we're in the VM with SSH into it. Okay. So we have a VM up and running in one line of a script. It's right there on our system. We can use that whatever way we want. Now, right now, this is useless. It has nothing in it. This is just an empty box file. There's nothing there. There's no web server, nothing else. But the fact is that this was created in one line. So let's log out. And let's halt it. Don't want that anymore. Done. Halted. Okay. Let's go for example 2. Okay, we've got a bit more information, a few more files this time, one more file rather. Still have our Vagrant file, but we also now have an index.php. Okay. So, what's going to happen here? Well, cut out this index.php. Very simple. It's just going to, I put a little content there, display the date as well. Nothing much to that. But if we go into the Vagrant file, okay, this is a bit more complicated. So, config .vm.box, there we go again. Config.vm.network, remember we were saying earlier about the forwarded ports? This is basically just saying any request that goes to the host system, the desktop system on port 80 is going to go to this VM on port 80. Okay? It's just going to be a standard web request. Then we've got some shell provisioning. You can specify this inline in your Vagrant file. All we're doing is, in a nutshell, installing MySQL, PHP, and Apache. There's a few extra stuff here just to sort of see the settings for MySQL. Don't worry too much about those. We're going to rmrf var www.html, then link/vagrant var www.html. Whenever you create a VM using Vagrant, it creates a folder in the root, off the root of the VM called Vagrant, and that is the same as it's basically a shared folder to the folder that contains the Vagrant file. So anything you put inside that folder, along with the Vagrant file, is available to the VM by default. Okay. So in this case, all we're doing is saying link that to var.html, which is the document root, the default document root for Apache on Trusty 64. So let's run this, see what happens. There we go. Same as before. See the actual line in there about forwarding port 80, and then underneath there, port 22 to 222. It does 22 to 222, sorry, 2222 by default. So all VMs will do that. Now, as I sort of mentioned at the start here, I've already created these VMs. The reason is that it would simply take too long to download all these packages, download the box files, everything else. I'd be stuck here for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, depending on what the network's like. So these have already been created in the background before this started. And you can see how quickly they start up after they've been initially created. Okay, so there's no waiting around. You're right there with it. So this is set up now. So what does it do? Okay, well, we can SSH into it again, obviously, but we can do more this time. Remember, we installed Apache, and remember, I also have that index.php. Remember, this has been symlinked to var www.html. Well, What am I doing? 27001. No. 127.0.0.1, 8080, what's going to come up? So that's the index.php. It's been parsed by PHP. It's gone through Apache. There we go. That's coming from our Vagrant box that we've created. Now, to prove it, I'll do alt again. Okay. Reload this, and funnily enough, it doesn't come up. Okay. So again, quite simple to set this up. You could have created a VM in VirtualBox, VMware, to do much the same thing without a whole lot of effort. But here we're doing it in one small file. It's just far, far easier, far more portable. So, final example is a little more involved. Okay, we're doing trusty 64 again. This time we're setting an IP address. Saying this is going to be a private network that this is on with an IP of 172.16.02. Setting up a synced folder. Remember I was saying before about how / Vagrant is linked back to the project folder, or the folder containing the Vagrant file. That's not the only sync folder you can set up. You can set up more. In this case, we're also saying that instead of creating a symlink to our document routes, we're just going to use a sync folder within our Vagrant file like this here. So // which is the current folder, is going to be synced to var.vm. Config provider VirtualBox. See, we're setting a couple of settings for VirtualBox here. It's the provider we're using. We're setting the memory to be 512 megs. This time we're using shell again for provisioning, but we're actually looking at a file. Okay, there's a file in this project folder. There's a folder called Vagrant, and then under that folder, there's a file called provision.sh. Okay, I'll bring that up now. So cd Vagrant. So there's our provision.sh. And this is, excuse me. This is a provisioning script. This is just running out Linux commands to install software. I'm not going to go into the details of this here, but it is setting up my VM to be exactly as I want it, with all the utilities I might want. Like a composer there, you can see at the top, other little things. So the provisioning process can be as simple or as complicated as you like. Even this is quite simple compared to what you can do. Okay. Now let's run this. Okay, so Vagrant up. Remember, this has been pre-provisioned. Okay, I've already set up this box in the past, so all it's doing is starting up, resuming. Okay, so this is running in the background now. Now, if you remember, IP address 172.16.02. We don't need port forward this time. We didn't specify it in the Vagrant file at all. It's not needed. We're looking at an IP address. This system is now being treated as an entirely separate box in our network. We don't need forward ports. We just access the IP. And there we have the same thing again. It's the same script. But this time, thanks to my more advanced provisioning, we also have a little control panel. So right under this VM, you can access PHPMyAdmin for looking at the database. Here's PHP info just to get a bit more information about it if you need it. APC control panel, if you use APC, and a few instructions for anybody who might be accessing this for whatever reason. That was just part of my provision to set up all of that software. One file to set up to initialize the VM, an extra provisioning file, and some other bits and pieces just to copy into the VM, whatever else, and we have this. Okay, just like that. You can easily set up your own little admin areas. You can obviously install PHPMyAdmin very easily, PHPinfo, all of this stuff. You can add whatever you want to this sort of system. Okay. That was it for the examples. So. So, to finish up here, there are some useful tools you can get for Vagrant. Vagrant, which we will see a little bit more later on, it's a Vagrant provisioning, short for Vagrant provisioning bash scripts. It's basically a single Vagrant file again, where you can uncomment lines and install what you need. It has everything right there for whatever sort of LAMP-based environment you may want. It has there the uncomment features that you want to use. Okay. You can create a really fully featured development VM. You can match your production environment again, whatever else. Very, very useful. And it will save a lot of time, especially if you're not 100% with Linux, installing packages, configuring things. It does it all for you. You just select which options you want. Ffmpeg, I think, is a web-based GUI for creating custom VMs that can be used in Vagrant via the Ffmpeg provisioner. So it's just a website. You go to the website, you say, I want whatever version of the operating system, I want Apache to be installed, MySQL, PHP, I want these settings, that settings, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of it, you get a Vagrant file and some, remember I mentioned Puppet from before, you get some Puppet script as well that will work with the Vagrant file to create whatever environment you decided to create using that website. Protobox is something very similar to that. Laravel Homestead is a pre-packaged box file and a custom Vagrant file that allows multiple sites on one VM. Remember before I was saying about how a Vagrant file can have any sort of Ruby code? Homestead takes advantage of that and allows things that you wouldn't normally expect, like configuration of your VM, certain aspects of your VM using JSON files, again, in your project root. Things like the sites that might be available in the project, forward reports can even be controlled via JSON, other things. Further resources then, we've got a Vagrant website, getting started guide, very useful. It really runs through everything you need to know, and then, yeah, the documentation for Vagrant is very good. You'll find everything you need to know on that site. VirtualBox website, of course, VMware website. If you are going to look into playing with Vagrant, definitely go with VirtualBox. I think VMware Workstation is commercial, anyway, you have to pay for it. VirtualBox is open source, and it's kind of the standard for Vagrant. That's it. That's all there is to it. So thank you very much for watching. Here are my details, and I hope you got something from this. Definitely look into it if you haven't before. It's really worth looking into. That's all I can say. It really saves a lot of time, makes things so much easier, and yeah, I think you'll really be able to take advantage of it. Okay? Any questions at all? Nope. Excellent. Very good. All right, guys, thanks very much.
Take a bit of a break. Stock up on Coke, seriously, I don't want to carry that on. 7 up for lunch. Supposedly there's going to be pizzas around in about 5-10 minutes, so it doesn't make sense to get stuck into the next talk until we get some grub in our hands. On the last slide there, I would recommend the VaporBash one myself. I haven't used it commercially in production and work. The PHPBelfast one, looks great. When you run through the wizard now, you go, this is awesome, but it creates a lot of files for you, a lot of public files, a lot of folders, a lot of resources, and it seems to introduce a break and change once a week. So the project that you start and you're working away on, when you come back to do an edit on it in a month's time and you spin it up, suddenly doesn't work because it's incompatible with an upgrade on VirtualBox or something crazy, whereas PHPBelfast is just a very flat, simple one Vagrant file.
Yeah, it lowers the barrier down to something wrong. You don't need to know any more than just downloading PHPBelfast and commenting a few things in the file. It all makes sense. It's really easy. It's a perfect way to get
actually
looking into it.
Run through. I've added a Vagrant file to the PHPBelfast framework that we developed in the last time we did one of these. And it's a very simple PHPBelfast file. I've scripted out all the rubbish, so you can actually just see literally the lines you need to uncomment. It's so simple. You pick up and run quickly. It almost serves as the best demonstration of how easy Vagrant can be.
And that'll be available. There
That'll
will
be
be
part of it.
code made available from what you're going to see. I know that's how it's true. Have a chat amongst yourselves.
All right.
Do you reckon
Yes.
if you're creating a box file just to start